Hey everyone, Mario again coming at you with another video, and as you can tell it's a top list. This time it's top 12. It is my top 12 favorite bands. Now, I will tell you this list was very hard to actually sit down and write because there's a lot of bands I like, but at the end of the day it came down to which bands I like to listen to the most and also which ones kind of influenced my taste in music. Because when it comes to music I do have kind of a broad taste, at least within rock, because mostly I listen to rock. I listen to country, though country I prefer older country. I do listen to a couple of rap songs, but that's a genre that it's like my interest is minimal in. I like classical music, I like movie soundtracks and all that. And I like certain genres of pop, like I love Japanese pop and I love older pop like 80s and before, or what would be considered popular music, you know, what crossed into it. But with this I decided to do bands. Now when I say bands, the majority of these are rock bands. So actually I think all these are rock bands, actually all these are rock bands, excuse me. So this is top 12 favorite rock bands. Now number 12, this is the only cheat on the list, and you'll see why after I read it. Creed / Alter Bridge. I think anyone with a knowledge of band history will probably know why that is. Because they consist of the same members with one main difference, and that is Creed, they actually have a guy who's actually just a singer, Scott Stapp, and of course Alter Bridge has their singer who is also the rhythm guitarist. Whereas with Creed, usually they have a guy do rhythm guitar live, which I don't know if they've updated it since I last checked, but I think they wanted to have that guy join the band full time or something, but that's the difference. And also their styles are different. Whereas Alter Bridge is more of like a bluesy, heavy metal-ish type of band. Creed is kind of in that post-grunge style, and I guess you could say that's the reason I'm actually getting into grunge now, is because of Creed and some other bands with that similar type of style getting me into it. Alter Bridge, because I was already a fan of heavy metal by the time I listened to them. They helped me get more. I was a fan of AC/DC, which by the way is not on the list. It was hard to debate to put it on or not, but AC/DC and a couple other bands like Danzig, they influenced me. They influenced my taste, I guess, a little bit, which is why Alter Bridge grew on me more. And that's also the reason I put them together, because basically two halves of the same coin because of the members. Number 11, this is a band I started listening to slowly, and it was only over the last couple of years as my taste grew more, I started listening to more of their stuff. I still have to listen to a lot more of their first two albums, because I mostly stick with their last three, but their first two albums I like a handful of their songs. And I don't know if at the time I record this video, which I'm recording this video on the 16th of July, I don't know if their new album has come out yet, but if not, if it has, I'll give it a listen to. But number 11 is Killswitch Engage. This band, I guess, is one of the reasons why I guess you could say it's one of the bands, along with a couple bands later on the list, that I actually prefer more melodic metal when it comes to certain things, like with the heavier bands and stuff. I prefer melody. And also, I guess you could say it's what got me to start listening to punk, because Killswitch Engage is metalcore, which is metal combined with hardcore punk, but it's melodic metalcore, so the melody. So that intensity, I like that, so I started listening. So listened to a couple other bands, one of which is only a couple up on the list. And I just love a lot of their music. Of course, obviously, it was the songs that were in movies that drew my attention, End of Heartache, Darkness Falls, and of course I listened to the first album with Howard, and the next one, and of course their last one, and of course that song they did for God of War 3. You will always be mine until my dying breath, possessing my soul, you're my obsession. That's a good song, and it fits. Of course they could have used one of the songs from their last album with Howard, but that's what it is. And I don't mind that they switch back to the original singer. I can understand. From what I heard, Howard has diabetes troubles or something, which his two close family members had it. I can understand that. Now number 10. Once I get to the end of the list, some people are probably going to flack me for having this at this part of the list, another band at another part of the list. Number 10 is Megadeth. Now, as I will explain my reasoning more on the when I get later down the list. But Megadeth is a band I've been a fan of for a while. This, along with Metallica, is what got me into thrash metal a little bit, and I guess because of that intensity, along with Killswitch, also helped me get into some punk. And I will say I do enjoy a lot the melody and all that. It's different than the other thrash ones. Well, Metallica's thrash, and maybe if I had to compare it to the other ones, it's, at least to me, it sounds more close to Slayer than it does Anthrax, but that's just me, and I haven't listened to all the songs. I still have to listen to a couple of their albums. It's mostly like the ones from the late 90s. I've mostly listened, most of my listening to them has been from the mid 80s to the early 90s, and then of course their albums in the 2000s and forward. But I could say I enjoy them enough that I put them on number 10 on this list. If I have to pick standout songs, you know, of course, everyone knows Peace Sells, but who's buying? Then, of course, Symphony of Destruction, Countdown to Extinction, A Tout le Monde, good song. I love that they re-recorded it as a duet. That was fitting. The World Needs a Hero. The White House is calling. Till I call him back. Just tell him anything, just get him off my back. You know, good. Then of course, This Day We Fight, and you know, off the top of my head, it's hard to remember a lot of the names of a lot of the songs, but a lot of them are good. Has some melody and a lot of intensity, and I actually don't mind Mustaine's singing voice. It's gotten better as he's sang more, but it has a uniqueness to it, which I think fits the thrash genre. It probably wouldn't work well in like a softer rock, or definitely wouldn't work in opera or musical or something, but it fits thrash metal. Number 9 is a band, one of the earlier rock bands I got into, and it's one I still enjoy listening to this day. Evanescence. Very great rock band that has that gothic appeal of it, and I guess you could say it's what helped get my inspiration for melody and rock. Of course, and because of the history of the band, it now has a trivia question. Tell me, what do rock bands Evanescence and Guns N' Roses have in common? Their current lineups today only have one member from the original lineup, and in both cases it is the singer. Of course, it's for different reasons. Axl Rose being kind of a dick to the rest of the members in Guns N' Roses, and with Evanescence it's creative differences. But of course we got another band out of it, We Are the Fallen, which I actually like their sound too, but they don't have enough albums and material out for me to compare them fairly. But I don't mind that We Are the Fallen has a similar sound to early Evanescence, because, you know, created by some of the same members, so it's bound to happen. Number 8 is Disturbed. Now, what I find funny about this is that some people don't even consider Disturbed to be metal, and whenever I read comments like that, I don't say it, but I'm thinking it like, what the fuck are you on? What do you consider metal then? If Disturbed is not considered metal, then that's weird. I will say probably it's their second album forward that has that more metal sound, because, well, all their albums have a metal sound, but the first album has kind of a new metal sound, which I could say I only will listen to a handful of the songs, you know, if I just randomly want to listen to a song. Some of them I can only listen to if, like, I just pop the CD in its entirety and listen to it. But standouts from that album, of course, you know, everyone knows Get Down with the Sickness, and of course their cover of Shout, and then of course Stupefy and a couple others. Second album I think is a good effort. Shows their sound shift, but I only listened to a couple of songs from it, like Mistress and Darkness, which I think is probably my favorite song off the album. It's the third album that I think Disturbed started really coming to its own musically. You know, it has sort of that intensity from the first album with the more rock sound from the second album, and it fit, you know, 10,000 Fists, their cover of Land of Confusion, Sons of Plunder. Then, of course, the fourth album, some critics flacked it, but I enjoy that sound, and a little bit more of that old school rock sound to it. Not as intense, but still good. It has a lot of good songs. And then their last album before the hiatus, well, normal album, good songs on there. You know, it's probably my. It's hard to say, but I think it's hard for me to say, but I think either their last album or Indestructible, my favorite album from them, but it's hard for me to say. But they're both. Last one's a good album, and then of course Lost Children, which I actually do have the shirt for in the closet. Their album of all the B-sides has a lot of good songs on it. Now number 7 is probably one of the more recent additions to this list. Number 7 the legendary horror punk band, The Misfits. Now, when I say this, I'm including all three incarnations. The Danzig era, the Graves era, and Only's era as the vocalist. Now, someone's probably going to say, which era is my favorite? I have to say that probably, I know I've said before, but I think probably now that the Graves era is my favorite. And then it's hard for me to pick if I like the Only era or the Danzig era more after that. Because I could say I like all three of them as vocalists. They're all unique in their own way. I mean, Danzig has that bass baritone type of voice, but it seems like he has that range too. Graves also has like a more clean vocal style compared to Danzig, and he kind of fits the more hardcore punk version of the Misfits from the 90s. And then of course Only has the has that crooner style that fits a Misfits more engraved in 50s and 60s style music, which is what their original material with him and of course their cover material sounds like. And also, if there's any problem I have with the Only style is that they play some of their older songs way too freaking fast. And if anything, they should modify them. Like some of the Danzig material they could play in a similar style to how it was originally recorded. But if they do the when it comes to the Grave material, some of their live stuff I like how they do it. Some of it I don't. Some of it I think they play way too fast. But I don't mind his vocals on it. Now, if I have to pick what my favorite album from the Misfits is, I think I'll probably do it by era. With the Danzig era, I'd have to say it's probably the second album. With the Graves era, it's probably Famous Monsters. And of course, it's with Only, they have a live album, Devil's Rain, and then of course their cover album. I'll have to pick the Devil's Rain on that, even though my main problem with that album is it's a little overproduced. Now, of course, a lot of people argue over, oh, Only sucks, McGrave sucks, all that. I don't see the point of arguing. Each era is good in its own right. I mean, the Danzig era, it has that early punk sound and all that, and you can tell it's influenced by older music, and then it gets a little hardcore in the last one, but only a little smidgen. Not as hardcore as, let's say, Danzig's band Sam Hain or Samhain, whichever pronunciation you choose. And of course, he got more bluesish metal with his solo band. And of course, the Graves era has that hardcore feeling, but it still has some of that 50s, 60s inspiration, but you don't really get that 50s, 60s rock and roll inspiration fully done until Only's era, and of course it includes solos, which is pretty good. And I also like that Only shares vocal duties sometimes with Des Cadena, like on the song Jack the Ripper. Where you gonna go, what you gonna do? Where you gonna go, what you gonna do? Where you gonna go, what you gonna do? I know the answer. And of course, I know, like I said, I don't mind Only's crooning style, it kind of fits. Number 6, along with Evanescence, one of the earlier rock bands I listened to, Stained. This one is one that I mostly loved them originally from their later albums, then I went back and discovered their earlier ones, which I got one of them right there, but I don't want to move stuff to grab it. And then of course, like a lot of fans, I discovered their first one, which has kind of that hardcore metal sound, which I will say I enjoy it, but I'm normally only listening to a handful of songs from it, which, and after listening to it, I can understand probably why the guitarist says he can't listen to the album. I mean, this is earlier stuff when they were trying to fit into a certain type of group, so I can understand. Their second album, their first major one that everyone knew about, good album. I'm glad that they re-recorded one of the songs. It's interesting to see the difference in style and tempo and all that. And of course, their next album, Good One, used one of the songs in tribute. Probably going to use a couple more. I only listen to a handful of songs from that album, though, religiously. And of course, we get to the album that I was introduced to them on, 14 Shades of Grey. I really love the first half of the album. The second half I listen to only when I'm listening to all the songs. But that's just me. And of course, after that, we got Chapter 5, good follow-up. And one thing I will say about them is that they've kept a certain style, but they've evolved and gone in like slightly different directions and experimented on each album. But you can definitely tell it's still the same band, which two other bands on this list will have that same praise for me on there. Some people might take that as a criticism, but me, I think it's a praise if the band can evolve musically while still retaining its original confines of what makes a band that band. It was Stained. I'll say that they really do rock. And their last album that came out, I think, was pretty good. And the thing that I like about that album is that it kind of has influence from all their previous albums. Like, most of the songs seem to be influenced by 14 Shades of Grey and their work on the album before that. Maybe a little bit of their first album, but it's mostly those ones. And then, of course, the last couple of songs are more influenced by, like, Chapter 5 and then The Illusion of Progress. And it's a good one, and I love Aaron Lewis's vocals. Fit the style of the band. Now, number 5 is probably the most recent band on this list, and it's one that I was introduced to by Jeff, and it's a band I really do love. It's one I'd love to see live. It is Five Finger Death Punch. 3 albums in, and I can honestly say they are one of my favorite bands. They're probably my favorite, more recent band. They kick a lot of butt. Now, what I like about them is that they have sort of a melody style. Maybe it's just in the bass line that kind of reminds me a little bit of the new wave of British heavy metal while still having a fresh sound to it. And of course, like Killswitch Engage, they alternate between clean and gruttal vocals, which I think is interesting in this style. And they have a lot of good songs. Their lyrics very good. Some of them are open to interpretation, but it's very good. Of course, noteworthy songs. Their cover of Bad Company, excellent cover. Salvation, which I think is a very interesting song, critiquing how religion can use people. And of course, probably a song everyone knows from their first album, The Bleeding, which has 3 different versions, one with screaming, one without, and then the acoustic version, which I think proves to show that you can turn any song acoustic and still make it as powerful. Their second album, War is the Answer, good title track. Succubus was a good bonus track. A Death Before Dishonor, if I remember correctly, is off that album. And of course, our last one, American Capitalist, another good title track. The Pride, a very interesting song, which I actually have a tribute idea for that song. I'm not going to spoil what it is. Remember Everything is an interesting song. Kind of plays against the style of music they normally play, but I think it works for them. Kind of is a grungish, metalish song, but I think it works, especially with the lyrics. Then, of course, the bonus track for that album is, dang it, I'm trying to remember this. I forget the one, but it's a very good song as well. I'm just naming standout songs, at least to me, but a lot of the songs are great. And it's a band that I recommend you give a listen to if you haven't to yet. Number 4, Blaze Bayley, his solo stuff. Now, of course, everyone knows Blaze Bayley. He was the 3rd vocalist for Iron Maiden. He's the one that everyone always flacks, which I don't see why they flack him for. Sure, he doesn't have the range that Bruce does or even that Paul did, but range does not a singer make. Range means what notes you can sing. It's technique more than range. And I think that Blaze actually had good technique, and he still does, and he has a good voice. It's a good bass baritone voice. I like it. If anything, you guys all know I've already done a Defending Blaze Bayley video. I think the main reason people complain about it is the fact that the older songs are not modified enough. More so the Bruce era ones to fit his voice. Some of them were, but a lot of them weren't. All they had to do was key and tone it right. Like if they had done it like in I forget which tone it is, but it's the one Metallica uses a lot live for their older songs to fit James's lower tone voice. But if they'd done something similar like that, Blaze might have actually sounded better. They might have actually been able to play Run to the Hills. You never know. Would have been interesting to see. But his solo stuff, it works, and it just shows how good of a singer he is. Like I have to say my favorite album from them is either his first one, Silicone Messiah, or his first one with the new lineup, Man Who Would Not Die. It was off of Silicone Messiah. Standout tracks include the title track, Evolution, the epic song Stare at the Sun, and of course The Brave. Off his second album, once again the title track, 10th Dimension, Meant to Be, which is kind of a 2-parter song involving The Truth Is Revealed. And then of course, dang it, Kill and Destroy, another good song. Off their 3rd album, Blood and Belief, title track, I think it's Path in the Way is the name of the song. And of course, That's one I've used a tribute for. Will to Win. Regret, which is an interesting song. I've done a Darth Vader tribute with it. And then, of course, Soundtrack of My Life. Also, of course, it was after that album that the majority of the people in his band left, and he did a new lineup, which toured for several years, getting people used to the new sound. Which I have to say, I love the sound of his of the lineup after that more than I did the first one. The first doesn't take anything away from the first lineup sound, but the second sound fits Blaze's voice a little bit more, in my opinion. And of course, from The Man That Would Not Die, we got the title track, an excellent song, which is actually the first track on the album, so it sets the stage. Samurai, good song. Serpent-Hearted Man. Cracking the System, a good anti-political song, especially since it actually uses actual audio near the end. Smile Back at Death, which is a song that begs to be used in an action movie tribute. And of course, from the last album with that lineup, dang, I forget the name of the album, but standout tracks, of course, 1633, which is about Galileo, Watching the Night Sky, and then of course the 4-part song about the stages of grief that Blaze wrote about his wife. And then, of course, speaking of which, apparently there's another song he wrote about his wife that's not on one of the albums called Endless Sleep, which is a good song, full of emotion. And then, of course, his more recent album, I have to say, he has some good songs on it, but I probably have to give it another listen to get my full thoughts on it. But songs like Dime Bag, which people on YouTube seem to be criticizing that song for some reason. I don't know why. And I also seem to be criticizing the guitarist on this album. I will say, on The King of Metal, the guitarist is not as good as his previous guitarist, but he's still a good guitarist. So basically like trying to say, it's basically like trying to compare one style to another one while trying to say, oh, the other one's better, without judging the guy on his own merits. That's just me. But the guitar is still good. And say Dime Bag, Fighter, Judge Me, which is an excellent song that seems to be kind of biographical. But maybe that's just me reading into it. Okay, and after Blaze, number 3 we have Blind Guardian. Excellent band, and like Stain, their style changed slightly as they progressed, but it's because they developed their own identity. They started in that speed metal style, kind of reminiscent of early thrash, and of course bands like Halloween. It's mostly on the first 2 albums and a little bit on the 3rd album, but it's their 3rd album they start to get their own identity, because the first 2 albums you got tracks like The Wizard's Crown, which those who watch my movie reviews, especially Monster Friends, will recognize as a song I used on my intro. Halloween, the Wizard's Crown, I take on Halloween. Halloween, the Wizard's Crown, you know that one. And of course, Guardian of the Blind. Of course, the Gandalf's Rebirth, which is instrumental, if I remember right. On the 3rd album, they start to break off and develop their own identity, but it still has that speed metal feel, well, especially on songs like Goodbye My Friend, which is about E.T. But you have to say that song probably would work better slow, like more like on acoustic or on a piano, but it's interesting in that. And of course, Tommy Knockers, which it's good they use that poem as the chorus. Oh, last night and the night before, Tommy Knockers, knocking at your door. Good that they use that as the chorus, and other songs. It's on the next album that they start to get their own identity and start to introduce like kind of a folk metal type vibe to their songs, which works. You know, especially on songs like Past and Future Secret, Mordred Song. I'm just giving songs off the albums from this time period, not in chronological order, if I remember right. Lord of the Rings, I prefer though the ballady version that's on there, their first compilation album. And of course the 2-part Hobbit song, Hobbit in the Forest, and the other one, which I think they've played live only a couple times. Then of course their compilation album has some good songs. It has a cover of a Queen song, which is fitting since Queen has kind of inspired the lead singer. It's actually a very good cover. And then of course on the bonus tracks on a more re-release they have a cover of a Judas Priest song, Beyond the Realms of Death, and a Dio song, Don't Talk to Strangers, which their cover is interesting too. Of course, some older covers, like a cover of Barbara Ann and Long Con Sally mixed together. And of course, their cover of Mr. Sandman is probably my favorite version of the song. because it starts off normally like you're what, then it builds into a metal thing, which is one of the reasons I really love Blind Guardian's covers, because it pays tribute to the original, usually in the beginning, and then gets its own identity with metal, like their cover of Dream a Little Dream of Me, and even their one of, especially their one of Inagata Davida. It was in the around 97, 98ish, I forget which year, that they released what a lot of people consider their magnum opus, Nightfall on Middle Earth, which is actually the first album I discovered of theirs, which got me into the sound, and then I backtracked and went forward. It's basically a concept album they did, which is about the Silmarillion, you know, that one book that Tolkien wrote about the history of Middle Earth before Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And it does a good job of translating a lot of the elements of the story to it. Like standout songs include the second song, Into the Storm, which is a good song. And of course Noldor, Dark Wind and Rain. Noldor, blood is on your hands, your fate, a tearful destiny. And of course Blood Tears. Among others, those are just the first few to come to mind. And of course the title track Nightfall. And of course the next one, which is A Night at the Opera, which titled pays tribute to Queen. This is probably the only one I don't really like that much. It's mostly because it's a little too, I guess, overthinking probably. And it's a little too mixed over, I guess, which I guess fits kind of the title, but just not for me. I mean, I like a couple of the songs, and not enough I can really listen to them over and over again. It's the next album, their follow-up, that I think is a little bit better, which you can notice a slight change in style here, mostly because the drummer left because he didn't like the direction they were going into, but I actually like the progressive metal direction they're going into right now. It's interesting. On that album, you got standout tracks like Fly, which is based off of Peter Pan and Finding Neverland. I'll teach you how to fly now, away we go. Good song. And of course, it even has a darker version of it, which I'll let you guys look that up. And then, of course, their last album so far, Interesting Ones. After really haven't listened to it in its time in a long time, but I thought the songs were pretty good. And it's kind of a hard to talk about the whole sound of that they've progressed from without you listening to the songs yourself. So I suggest you look up the songs. Number 2, like I mentioned earlier, there's probably going to be there might be some people going, what with this? Number 2, Metallica. I know right now some people are probably thinking, or someone probably going to type, how dare you put Metallica over Megadeth, you whore! Lucifer! Now, there's a reason I put Megadeth under Metallica, and that is, even though, like I said before, I like Megadeth, I prefer the melodic type of thrash metal that Metallica did. Now, I will admit that in its earlier days, a lot of that is influenced by Mustaine being the lead guitarist, but I think that's mostly prevalent on the first album. Because after that, it usually just seems speculation to me that they used any of his material. I know on the second album they used a little bit of it, but I think most of that is James, Lars, Kirk, and of course, Cliff. The first album, it's, all the stuff from the earlier days, including Mustaine, but after that is where they started migrating, and I think by Master of Puppets, it was basically all their material. And of course, it's just, when it comes to people who are fans of Megadeth, or who are fans of both, but side with Mustaine, I think it's just all speculation. If you want to believe it, that's fine, but me, I don't really see any stake in it. Now, as I said, I prefer the melodic sound. Now, there's one thing I have to get off my chest. I actually... James, his voice did improve as time went on, but I think his best singing voice was on the Black Album. That's because he still had the range from earlier, but it had the technique. Now, the reason is that on the first 4 albums, I love the melody and all that, but James's singing voice I don't really think is that good, because it seems, on a lot of the times, he's just screaming the lyrics instead of actually singing them, which he's even admitted he's not a vocalist, more so probably now since he actually has had training. He actually probably would consider more a vocalist now, but just seems a lot of that. I mean, there's ones where he actually sounds good, like on One, Dyer's Eve, Master of Puppets, Seek and Destroy, Fade to Black. There's those ones, that type of singing voice, how he does it fits and it's tolerable. But on some of them, it's like, jeez, he's just screaming those vocals. which is why I wish he probably would have gotten vocal training before he blew out his voice the first time, because he blew it out twice. Once during the recording of the Black Album, and once when they were touring, which is why he eventually sought voice training. Now, his voice after the second blowout, I think, is still pretty good, but it's kind of a shadow of his former self, especially on the Black Album. Now, of course, I'm gonna have to bring this up. I personally don't think Metallica sold out. Now, before people get me this, the reason is nothing wrong with them modifying their sound. I mean, as much as I love their thrash sound on the first 4 albums, and even on Death Magnetic and After Magnetic, or Beyond Magnetic, excuse me, I actually don't mind that they went to a more old school type of metal. Because think of it, the type of metal that they did on the Black Album, Load and Reload, is blues inspired, which is basically kind of like the Black Sabbath type of metal, the Led Zeppelin type of metal, the older metal. People say they sold out, or that's not metal. It's like, so you're saying Zeppelin isn't metal, so you're saying Sabbath isn't metal, you're saying that AC/DC isn't metal because they are in that same type of blues metal vibe, even though they consider themselves rock and roll, but you can tell they inspired that type of metal. Even Danzig is in that one. People don't criticize that for not being metal. But then again, you know, different kind of context and story there, but it's the same thing. I think it's more so with the Load and Reload albums that Metallica has that problem, because the majority of people seem to like the Black Album. Mostly so, like, I think it's probably like individual songs. But me, I like the Black Album in its entirety. I'll say I like certain songs better than other ones, but I think it's a good album. Load and Reload, I will say they're good efforts and all that, but I can't say the same thing that I like every single song. I mean, there are songs I do like. I mean, everyone seems with the Load and Reload, everyone likes songs like Ate My Bitch, Until It Sleeps, The Unknown, Torn, whatever the last song is, Fuel, Memory Remains, and of course Unforgiven 2. But I like some of the other songs, like, don't listen to them often, but I can listen to 2x4. I can listen to Hero of the Day, or whatever it is. I can listen to Better Than You, and occasionally I can listen to Slither and some of the other songs from Reload, but, you know, not some of my favorite songs from the band, but I can listen to them. Mostly, though, if I'm like listening to a whole album. And of course, I also do fall into the category of people that don't mind Saint Anger, because that was partially because that was the first. That was kind of the album that got me into the band. Then I went back and discovered other music randomly, and then eventually got them, you know, on the album order. I will say, listening to them, you know, just randomly, I can only listen to a few of the songs, but I can listen to the entire album back to back. Though I will say, I do agree though that the album was kind of an overthought at times, especially songs like, well, of the ones I listen to a lot, probably Some Kind of Monster is overly long, which is why I like the live versions in that respect, because they do shorten some of the songs and they add the solos, which I can understand that complaint, which that does make the song sound like a totally different band if it wasn't for James's voice. And I can understand the whole drum thing on it, at least on that. And I can also understand live how people always complain how Lars is a piss poor drummer. But that, I think, is because of the fact he doesn't seem to practice, instead of him actually not having any talent. He's not the best drummer, I will say, but I think he's still a pretty good drummer. He just needs to practice more. Get off his lazy ass, go count your money, and actually practice, then you'd probably sound better live. Especially on songs like Dyer's Eve. He sounds decent live, but he could sound way better. And of course, I do like Death Magnetic. I think it's a good return to the thrash sound, and it still has that thrash sound, but of course it has some of that evolution that they did. Maybe evolution is the wrong word. Some of that tinkering that they did has some of that. Now, when it comes to the bassists, Cliff is undisputedly the best, but I have to say, technique-wise, I have to say I prefer Rob over Jason, and that's just me. Not to say that Jason's a bad bassist, just I prefer his style with him. Maybe it's because he actually got to play thrash with them. Oh, then again, they both play thrash, but you can actually hear Rob's, but that's another video thing. Now, of course, those of you who probably know me who probably already know what number one is. My number one favorite band of all time is Bow to You, O earth and sea, for the devil sends a beast with wrath, because he knows the time is short. Let that who have understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666. That's right. Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden! I wonder if anyone will get that, but That's right, Iron Maiden. One of the first heavier rock bands I listened to, got me hooked on the heavier rock and also on the melodic sound. And it's a band that, like Stained and of course Killswitch, has never fundamentally chased the basics of its sound, even though they have experimented. Of course, in the earlier days, it kind of had a punk-inspired sound, but that, of course, based on what Steve Harrison and said, I have to chalk that up to the recording style and also the style of Paul Di'Anno over Intentions. And of course, with Bruce, they evolved more. The first couple albums of Bruce, they kept that style but evolved a little bit more. Plus, they had better recording techniques. And of course, Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son and Seventh Son, they experimented with like synthesizers and all that, and it added, I think, to the sound. And of course, they went with a more stripped down style with the next album, and the album after that, kind of normal sound, good songs. And of course, with Blaze, they went into a slightly darker area lyrically and slightly musically because of his deeper voice, which I think fit that time. And of course, the first album back with Bruce kind of fits their evolution as musicians, because it has kind of a progressive sound, so it fits their evolution as musicians while still maintaining what makes Iron Maiden Iron Maiden. And of course, it's good to hear Bruce again. Then of course, the next couple albums keep experimenting progressively while keeping that foundation and great sound. Now, of course, like I mentioned before with Blaze, I don't mind him as a vocalist. I think he fits the songs that they wrote with him a lot better than, let's say, Bruce does. But Bruce does a good job singing them, but I think Blaze's voice fits it more because they're darker songs, especially songs like Lord of the Flies, Klansman, Edge of Darkness. Now, Paul, he can't really sing as well anymore, but I think he's still decent now. But on his songs, he was very good, but on some of them, I have to say I prefer Bruce's singing on them, like the title track of the first album and the band's namesake song, Iron Maiden. And Remember Tomorrow, I think he does good on. Killers, that was his audition song. He rules on that song. And of course, with Bruce's era, there's a lot of songs that go on forever. Power Slave, The Trooper, Flight of Icarus, Number of the Beast, Hallowed Be Thy Name, Quest for Fire, Flash of the Blade, Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, Somewhere in Time, Alexander the Great. Like I said, I could go on for hours. And of course, we all know, everyone who knows the band knows why Bruce left originally to do a solo career, and I can understand why. And of course, with Blaze, I like a lot of his songs. Como Esta Amigos. Forget the name of the song off the top of my head, but the chorus is, "Don't you think I'm a savior? Don't you think I could save you? Don't you think I could save your life?" And of course, Lord of Flies, and all that. I'm going to do another video one of these days to talk about my favorite albums and songs after that, but Iron Maiden, just all around fun rock band. They evolved their sound, but while keeping the key components of their style in place. And even though they changed vocalists a couple times, they managed to maintain that. Now, of course, I can understand the people are iffy on the change of vocalists, but I just don't understand a lot of the arguments. Like I said, oh, he doesn't have the same range, and that makes him a worse vocalist. How? Anyway, guys, that concludes my list. If you guys want to say what your favorite rock bands are, you can do it in the comment section below, or feel free to do a video response. I'm out.